A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. The only thing that makes German so hard are the articles. Life is too short to learn German. That's what Oscar Wilde said years ago. Well, do I agree on that? Not necessarily, and I'll tell you why. Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Resh and I'm running a YouTube channel which is all about languages. I have videos about various languages such as Turkish, German, English, and Spanish. So if you're into that kind of stuff, make sure to stay here, like this video, and also subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. So today's video is going to be a beginner guide for people who want to learn German. If you have no idea about the German language and if you would like to know what kind of a language it is, if it's a rather hard language or an easy language for you to learn, then this video is probably perfect for you. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Resh and I was born and raised in Germany and I lived there a total of 23 years. So it's basically my native language. In this video, I'm basically going to be talking about the German grammar, about the pronunciation rules, about the root of the German language, and also about the similarity to other languages. So by the end of this video, you'll definitely have an idea about the German language. You'll get to know some basics, and I'll also teach you some sentences that you can use in everyday conversation. So most people ask me, hey Resh, do you think German is a rather hard language? Well, it depends on your native language. If your native language is an Indo-European language, then learning German will be probably pretty easy for you. Since the name already gives it away, German is a Germanic language. Other languages that belong to that family are Norwegian, Dutch, and English. So let's say if you're a native English speaker, then German will probably be rather easy for you to learn. But let's say if you're a native speaker of a Latin language such as Spanish, Portuguese, French, or Italian, then German is not going to be a big obstacle either, since those languages also belong to the Indo-European languages. So first of all, let's start off with the pronunciation. German is not a phonetic language, which means that even if you know the pronunciation of every single letter of the alphabet, it's not going to be enough for you to be able to pronounce every single word, because sometimes letters may be pronounced differently. That's why I'm saying that it's not phonetic. However, German definitely has a rule for almost every single pronunciation, unlike English. English is a mishmash of nonsense when it comes to pronunciation, because you cannot really rely on rules. You just have to basically know every single word and know how to pronounce it properly. But in German, you can really rely on some rules, which I'm going to be talking about now. So first of all, let's take a look at the alphabet. So the German alphabet has 26 letters plus an additional 3 letters which are called Umlaute, so a total of 29 letters, which are A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. And the Umlaute are A, Ö, Ü. So I want to give you some pronunciation hints here, especially when it comes to the S and the Z. And there's also a sharp S in German, so which we call scharfes S. So sometimes the letter S in German is pronounced as a true S. So in the word was, which means what in German, it is an S sound, as you can hear, s, as in soap, right? Was. But sometimes, and mainly when the S is in the beginning of the word, it will be pronounced as a Z sound. For instance, in Seife, Seife, which is soap in German, you can literally hear a Z sound. All right, so how is the Z pronounced? The Z is pronounced as a ts, ts, which is the sound you make when you say what's up. What's up, right? So the TS sound kind of. You have the pronunciation which is adapted from German for schizophrenia, right? You say schizophrenic. Schiz, you hear that? Z. That's the Z sound you always have to make in German. You have it in words like Zahn, which is tooth in German. And then, as I said, we have a sharp S, which is actually a true S sound. Because, as I said, sometimes when you have the S, it's not always pronounced as an S, but to make sure that it is pronounced as an S sound, you'll have the sharp S, which is always pronounced like that. For instance, in words like Fußball, which is soccer or football, if you will. So basically, whenever you see an S, it might be pronounced as a Z, but it might also be pronounced as an S. If you see a Z, it's always pronounced like a S. If you see a sharp S, it's always pronounced like an S. And also, whenever you see a double S, it's also always pronounced as a true S, as in Wasser, which stands for water. So let's talk about the J. The J is mainly pronounced as a Y, which you know from the Y sound. For instance, in words like Jäger, which means hunter. You might know this word from Jägermeister, which is a famous German brand for liquor. But sometimes the J might also be pronounced as a J, but mainly in words that are foreign, like foreign words, for instance in jacuzzi. Okay, let's talk about the German R, shall we? So the German R is different than the English R or than the Spanish R because it comes from the back of the throat. It comes from here somewhere, so it's rrr. In a lot of languages, the R is being rolled, as in Spanish or in Turkish. You go rrr, right? But that's not how you pronounce the R in German. It really comes from the back of the throat. So you would go Rand or Regel. So in English, we tend to pronounce the R from the front of our mouth. But in German, it comes from the back, so it's not that easy. The French do the same kind of pronunciation, but as for the rest of the world, I think it's a little bit hard to get that right. All right, let's try to distinguish the V and the W, the V and the V. The V, guys, can be pronounced as an F, but also as a V. It depends. You really basically have to know the words. For instance, in words like Vogel, which is bird in German, it is pronounced as an F, as you can hear. But in some words like Vase, which stands for vase, it is pronounced as a V, but I feel like it's mainly pronounced as an F, but sometimes as a V. So it's basically either a V sound, as you know from words like violence or ventriloquist, or as an F sound, which you know from words like folk or fire. But the W, and now some English people get confused here, is always a V sound. There is no W sound that you know from English. A sound like woo, which you have in water, it doesn't exist in German. The W you see in German is always a V sound you know from words like violence or ventriloquist. So in words like Wasser in German, where you see a W at the beginning of the word, you have to actually bite your lower lip with your upper teeth. So you go Wasser. It's not Wasser as you would say in English, right? You would say water. So that's not a V sound, it's a W sound. But there is no English W sound in German. So whenever you see a W in German, it's always a V sound. As for the Umlaute, those are actually letters that throw some people off. They're not so hard. I mean, if you know how to pronounce them, then they're pretty easy. So this letter would be pronounced A. But I feel like most of the time in spoken German, it's not that of an A, it's mainly an A, right? I'll give you an example. For instance, in a word like cheese, right? It would be spelled like this. You'd have to say Käse. Käse, because it's an A sound, right? But I feel like we just say Käse as if it were two E's. For the most part in Germany, very few people would actually pronounce it as an A. Let's give another word. For instance, this word, right? Which is the plural for Apfel, which stands for apple. It would have to be Äpfel, but I just say Äpfel. So I kind of make it like an E sound. I probably have a lot of German followers also watching this video. Leave your comment in the comment section below what you think about this. But for the most part, if you pronounce an A as it's supposed to be, then it feels a little bit weird, at least to my ear. I would just encourage you guys to pronounce it as a regular E sound. And then we have the O with the two dots, which is pronounced as Ö in words like Öl, which stands for oil. Also a pretty easy sound. You might recognize that sound from words like work, where your mouth also kind of pronounces that pronunciation. You know, it's Ö. It's not as in work. It's a little bit more stressed. So I don't think that that's too hard. And then the U with the two dots, which is pronounced as Ü, which you have in words like über, which basically means above. If you know the app Uber, it's actually pronounced Über in German. You gotta get that one right too. So it's Ü as in über. Then we have some combinations which always give away one specific pronunciation, as for SCH, which is always pronounced as a sh. The German word for school is Schule, and as you can hear, it's the same sound you make when you pronounce an SH in English. It's the sh as in ship. Then we have the combination of CH, which might be a little bit hard to learn because it can have two different pronunciations. To distinguish it, I will call one of them the soft CH and the other one the hard CH. So the soft one would be as in words like ich, which means I, ich. Or if I want to say me, I say mich. If I want to say light, I say Licht. So again, a sound that comes from the back of the throat, and it's a little bit hard to pronounce because most languages do not have that sound. They don't have an equivalent. You really have to hear that one and try to, copy that. And then the hard one would be as in rauchen, which means to smoke, or in Kuchen, which stands for cake. So it's a little bit harder. It's the soft one would be and the hard one would be. It's again from the back of the throat, and it kind of sounds a little bit Arabic if you ask me. If you see the combination of EI, it's pronounced I in German. For instance, in words like Freiheit, which means freedom in German. If you see the combination of EU, then it's pronounced Oi in German. In words like Europa, which stands for Europe. Then if you see a TSCH, it will be pronounced as a ch, as in chair, and you have it in words like klatschen, which means to clap in German. If you see a DSCH, it is pronounced as a j, as in jungle. I'm gonna give you the same word in German, Dschungel. Another hint, if you see an SP or an ST, the S will generally be pronounced as a sh. For instance, in words like spielen, which means to play, or in words like Strafe, which stands for penalty in German. But there is an exception to that rule. Let's say if you have a word with an SP or an ST, where you can see that the S is in a different syllable and the P or T is in a different syllable, then it will not be pronounced as a sh. In words like Wespe, you see the SP, but the S is in the first syllable and the P is in the second syllable. So you have a S sound, not a sh sound. You say Wespe. And also, if the word is a foreign word, for instance, a brand like Sprite, you wouldn't say Sprite, you would say Sprite. But some Germans, especially the older generation, do pronounce it as Sprite, which sounds super funny and definitely incorrect. If you see this ending of a word, which you might already know from English, then you have to know that it's pronounced Zion. In a word like institution, the German pronunciation of that word would be Institution. That's the same word, by the way, the same spelling, but it's pronounced differently. We say Institution, or in a word like Aktion. Keep that in mind. It's weird, but at least there's a rule for it. So also keep in mind that there are a lot of foreign words in German, and Germans generally try not to modify those words. Germans actually try to pronounce the word in its original language. When you have a word like this, which we would pronounce as restaurant in English. In French, it would be restaurant, but Germans try to pronounce it in a French way because they know it's a French word, but they have a German accent when doing that. So you will hear a lot of Germans say restaurant. Also, some older generation German people will try to pronounce it in a German way and say Restaurant, which is absolutely wrong. The correct pronunciation here would be trying to pronounce it in a French way, but with a German accent. So it would be restaurant. That's how a normal German guy would say it. Also with English words, we have a lot of English words in German, for instance, computer or laptop, but we don't pronounce it as computer or laptop. We try to pronounce it with an English accent, but we have a German accent when we say it. So it's like Computer and Laptop. Hey, guck mal, ich habe einen neuen Computer. Hey, look, I have a new computer. Ach wirklich, ich habe einen Laptop. Oh really, I got a laptop. So try to make it sound English but with a German accent, right? You get it? When it comes to grammar, a lot of people are shocked and terrified of the articles, which is probably the biggest obstacle of German. And I totally agree when people say that it's very, very hard for them to learn that, because German is ruled by genders, especially in terms of articles and the adjectives you use alongside the articles. because you also have to change them. So in English, we only know the article the. But in German, you have der, die, das. You have 3 different articles. And the problem is they don't come with a rule. It just depends on the sound of the word. Der is masculine. Die is feminine. And das is neutral, right? So you would probably say, oh, der would be everything that kind of looks male or is male, and die would be like everything that is female, and das would be like for every object, right? But it's not the case. It really doesn't make much sense, but it just really depends on the pronunciation of the word. I don't know every single German word out there, and neither does any other German. But even if I would stumble upon a word that I don't know, I would probably know the article for it, just because I know every other word and every other article, and just the sound of the word would tell me which article would be the correct one for that word. In the beginning, you really have to memorize all the words with the articles. There is no simple way around it. There is no simplicity for the articles. But once you learn them and once you get a feeling for the articles, you will know, even if you stumble upon words you don't know, you will have a feeling for it. So to give you an impression, boy would be Junge, der Junge, so it would be a male article, which makes sense, right? But then you have the word girl, which is Mädchen in German, but it has the article das, and das is neutral. Doesn't really make sense. If you have a word like flower, it will be die Blume, which is feminine, and then you have a word like das Auto, which is the car, and it's neutral, but then you have der Bus, which is the bus, but masculine. So it doesn't make sense. It just really depends on the sound of the word. There are some few rules though. I don't want to say that there are no rules, but I don't want to give you guys the rules because there are so few and they're not really going to help you to have an insight. Unlike English, German verbs are being conjugated, which means that if you learn German, you have to know how to conjugate verbs. And there are some rules again for that. Let's say you have a word like gehen. Ich gehe, du gehst, er geht, or sie geht, or es geht. Wir gehen, ihr geht, sie gehen. So this is just one example, but you have like 4 or 5 different verb endings that you will have to remember to memorize to be able to know how to conjugate verbs in German. Plus, there are some exceptions to the rules, which you would also have to know. If you want any more videos about this topic, just leave a comment in the comment section below and I'll shoot more videos on German conjugation. And as I said, the thing with the adjectives is that they also change depending on the article of the word. Rich on its own would be reich. Let's say you want to say a rich boy, then you would say ein reicher Junge. But when we were talking about a girl, we said ein reiches Mädchen, right? So you see that it changes. The only thing that makes German so hard are the articles. So once you really cross that obstacle, then German will be super easy for you, especially if you're an English speaker. The usage of capital letters in German. In English, you only use capital letters in the beginning of a sentence, or if you use a name, or if you use the letter I, right? In German, you use capital letters in the beginning of a sentence for names, and also if you use a word that can have an article. If I want to say I'm buying a car, then I would say ich kaufe ein Auto. So I would have to use capital letters for the A in Auto. That's also a thing that you have to remember. In German, there's also a way of speaking politely to foreigners or people you don't know that well, or even to, you know, people who work at a higher position in a hierarchy system. Let's say if you want to talk to your boss, you would have to use that polite version of speaking, which is referring to him as Sie. For English speakers, this might be a little weird because in English there's only you, and you is du in German, right? But if you speak to a foreigner, you wouldn't say du to him or her. Or if you talk to your teacher, your professor, your boss, you would never ever say du. You would always refer to him as Sie. That word Sie also comes with capital letters to distinguish it from the other Sie, which is she in German. So let's say if I'm talking to a friend of mine and I want to say, hey, are you going home? I would say, gehst du nach Hause? Gehst du nach Hause? But if I'm talking to my boss, I would never say that. I would say, gehen Sie nach Hause? which is translated into "Are you going home?" but in a more polite way. It's hard to explain it in English because there's no equivalent for it in English, but a lot of other languages I know have it, so you gotta get used to that too. So if you ask me, German is a very, very rich language in terms of words, because I feel like there's a word for everything in German. You can combine words and make longer words out of them. I kind of like that. And also, when I want to emphasize something and I want to use a specific word, I feel the best when I speak German because I have such a big spectrum. I feel really comfortable because it's also the language of the poets. But I kind of feel like, despite all the things that I just mentioned, I feel like German is a cold language because you can't really be too kind. Like, there is not really, there's always like a distance in German. Like, when you speak, the culture is a little bit more cold than other languages. I don't want to sound crass or negative, but it's just the way that I feel. It's not that I don't like German, it just makes me feel a little bit more, you know, I feel like there's a barrier when you speak German. I like it anyways though. For everybody out there who wants to learn it, I would encourage you to learn it because it's cool. It's a nice language and you have so many words and so many different, yeah. So for this part, I want to teach you guys how to count in German and also how to say a couple of things that you might want to say when you get to know someone or try to express yourself a little bit in German. Let's start off with the numbers. I'll teach you how to count from 1 to 10 in German. So it goes 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, 6, 7, 7, 8, 8, 9, 9, 10, 10. And now I want to tell you guys how you can introduce yourself in German. If I were to meet one of you, I would say, "Hallo, ich bin Resh. Wer bist du?" Which would mean, "Hello, I'm Resh. Who are you?" Hallo, ich bin Resh. Wer bist du? Hallo, ich bin Resh. Wer bist du? You can also say, "Wie heißt du?" Wie heißt du? Which would mean, what's your name? Then you can say, "Mein Name ist Resh." My name is Resh. Mein Name ist Resh. Wie geht's dir? Wie geht's dir? Which is the short version of Wie geht es dir? But we mainly just say Wie geht's dir? Which stands for How are you? Mir geht's gut. I'm fine. I'm good. Mir geht's gut. Und dir? What about you? And you? Und dir? You can say, "I don't feel that well. I feel bad." For that, you would go, "Mir geht's schlecht." Mir geht's schlecht. Or, "Mir geht's nicht so gut." Mir geht's nicht so gut. Danke. Thank you. Danke. Bitte. Bitte. You're welcome. Woher kommst du? Where are you from? Woher kommst du? Ich komme aus Deutschland. I am from Germany. Ich komme aus Deutschland. If you want to say pardon me or excuse me, you would go Entschuldigung, Entschuldigung. I have 3 siblings. Ich habe 3 Geschwister. Ich habe 3 Geschwister. Be careful, do not use this word Geschwister in singular. If you want to just refer to one sibling, just say Bruder or Schwester. Do not say Ich habe ein Geschwister. Some dictionaries will say that it's okay to use it that way, but it's definitely wrong. I mean, it sounds very weird. I've heard some German learners actually say that, and it just sounds very, very weird. Do never say ein Geschwister. Do not say that. Just if you want to refer to one sibling, either say brother or sister, Bruder or Schwester. If you want to say bye to someone, you would say Wir sehen uns. Wir sehen uns. Auf Wiedersehen. Auf Wiedersehen. If you want to say yes or no, you would go ja, ja, or nein, nein. So yeah, I think that was it for this video, guys. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up and stay tuned for more. Hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell. Also follow me on my social media. I'm on Instagram and on TikTok. See you guys in one of my next videos. Till then, take care.